Hello all, thank you so much for coming and joining us today. Just to introduce myself, my name is Slcc Guevara. I am a slam poet from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm super excited to be here today. Thank you. You know, I do love being a part of anything community, literary-based, events, and especially to be in a space that is celebrating and recognizing our presence as Latinas is such a wonderful thing to see. I did have the pleasure of earning my associate's degree here at SLCC, so to see it on its way to being, a Hispanic Serving Institution is such an amazing thing. With that being said, I'm here to share a few pieces of poetry with you all today. A little bit about me. I am Salvi American. My mom is from Utah, born and raised, as was I. My dad is from El Salvador. So I've used writing as a way to kind of examine and pick apart, identity and find the ways that I fit into my world. So with that being said, this first piece I'm going to share with you is one that I wrote in high school, revamped, of course, because we have evolved since then. But it is titled Purple. My heart is an import, a boxed organ, a sheltered thing. I swear that sometimes, though I was born in the US, it feels like it was made in a Latin American country, then shipped to the States. But then again, what is more American than this? And what is it to be called when it arrives, but also belongs somewhere else? My heart is cradled in a blue and white flag, carries the scent of its country in its fibers, an aroma of humidity and fried plantains that curls around the heartstrings and pulls, stains the whole thing blue. My fingertips, though, are nestled under star-spangled banners. They love the feel of Nike shoelaces, greet the shape of Coca-Cola bottles like old friends, been soaking in red dye since the day I was born. One pulse, and blue blood cells are running down the halls of my arteries. One breath sends red dye swimming upstream through my veins. They are a collision at the fragments of my capillaries, and so my blood is purple. In case you're wondering, no. My capillaries are not biological borders, not a place for armed vigilantes to stand ready and loaded, not an area to build up walls or military presence against weary bodies. No, my capillaries are junctions, places for these colors to blend and mix, some parts coming out more violet than mulberry, more lilac than mauve, but still purple. Purple because I am both second generation US Salvadoreña and many generations Scandinavian. A white girl, yes, but also a Vicha Guanaca with her own shade of purple blood, which is why my hair is dark brown like the beans in my abuela's cooking, but my skin only ever stays snow white like my childhood movies. My blood is purple, and I carry cumbia rhythms to guide my feet, but rap lyrics to teach me how to use my voice. My blood is purple, and I wear my Spanish, not on my hip like a weapon against my American identity, but like a badge of honor on my chest, the same place I put my hand when I say the Pledge of Allegiance. My blood is north-south of the border, is not the shade of your stereotype, and was never meant to be. Don't call my home a melting pot, then tell me to separate the red from the blue, because I do not exist without both. Answer to the previous question, what is more American than this? Nothing, not even apple pie. Answer to the previous question, what is it to be called when it arrives, but also belongs somewhere else? Any of the following responses: confused, proud, el corazón de un US Latine. Thank you all so much.
Okay, go home now. That's all you needed. Chelsea, that was beautiful. Thank you so very much. So she introduced herself, but let me share a little bit more about Chelsea from her bio. So as you know, she's an alum of Salt Lake Community College, which we are so very proud of, and is a spoken word poet, as you just saw and witnessed for yourself. She began to write poetry in high school, and since then has been involved in the literary scene, not just as a performer, but also as a coach for local high schools. And I think, as we just heard, as a mixed Salvadorian and Caucasian woman, she focuses her writing on the complexity of identity and her culture and the communities and the perceptions that exist about them. So we're going to have the pleasure of hearing from Chelsea throughout the morning, and I can't thank you enough for joining us. Thank you so. One more round of applause for those beautiful words. So welcome to all of you. Welcome to those who are joining us remotely. And as I'm getting more and more grateful to be able to say thank you for those that are joining us in person. It is a pleasure to have you here in the room with us and to feel your energy and the sense of community. Thanks for joining us for what has become a grand tradition, pun intended, at Salt Lake Community College. Yeah, that was probably Seth. No, okay. As you may remember, or for those of you who are joining us for the first time at this event, SLCC is one of 3 college-wide events alongside convocation and commencement, designed to check in mid-year to update us on how are we doing with our strategic goals and how are we living into our vision, mission, and values. So today, I think you're going to hear a more deliberate focus on certain keywords from our shared vision. Oh, do we have to broadcast that whole vision of me? Can't we just stay on the slide? Okay, vision. So this is our vision statement. And I'm hoping today that we're going to breathe life into these 3 words from that vision statement: model, transformative, and inclusive. So this vision statement has guided us, as many of you know, for very many years, and in many ways has led us to better processes and initiatives and decisions. But there's still work to do. And today's discussion is going to center around an initiative that is very layered, comprehensive, and critical. And if done well, could truly transform our institution and help guide others towards success, so we could become a model. The word inclusive has been in our lexicon for many, many years and has adapted and broadened as we have matured as an institution. But while the meaning and scope of inclusion has changed and will continue to broaden even further as a Hispanic Serving Institution, I would suggest that we have been working on inclusion for a very long time. And while there's still work to do, we have achieved a great deal. For instance, the creation and opening of spaces or initiatives such as the Dream Center, the Racial Equity in the Professoriate Program, our Spanish language application and orientation, the Gender and Sexuality Students Resource Center are examples of relatively new areas of inclusion at the college. And our Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs, our Chief Diversity Officer position, and the Multicultural Student Council are excellent examples of fairly long-standing, ever-evolving commitments as well. And from our values, I hope today that you're going to see many things that reinforce certain of those stated values. This initiative we're embarking on is going to involve collaboration. We're going to be in community with each other and with our neighbors. We're going to focus on inclusivity and the multiplicity that is involved in that word. We're certainly going to innovate, and we need to do things differently with fresh thinking and new ideas. And we're all going to learn together. We know that learning is sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes surprising, but often always leads us to a better space. So I hope that you'll see, and I know that the HSI Collaborative Work Team are basing their work in these values and grounding what we do going forward in them. I hope today that you'll experience those values in action. So you're going to hear more detail around all of our strategic goals in a moment from Vice President Aird, but I want to highlight a few metrics that are going to speak to the foundation of our conversation today. So we've been watching certain metrics for a long time and digging deep to get a better understanding of how we can more effectively serve our Salt Lake County service area. So, first slide. We know that Salt Lake County is the 2nd largest county in Utah, the 2nd fastest growing, and the most racially and ethnically diverse. This is where people of color live in Utah, and we are the beneficiaries of that as an institution. Our learning spaces have amazing assets because of that diversity. So it is incumbent on us, if Salt Lake County is our service area, we need to reflect that service area in our population of students, faculty, and staff, And we have to be mindful of that population as we look at curriculum and spaces and culture and the way that students find themselves amidst that community. So we know that this is a specific part of our Salt Lake County service area that we need to focus on. Look at this slide. So this slide shows us, since 2005, the college-age growing population in Salt Lake County. So 14% of the college-age population over that time now identify as non-Hispanic, 53% as Hispanic, Latinx. Those terms are going to be used interchangeably today, so just be aware of that. So we see that that diversifying of our county is very, very influenced by the Latinx population, and that's why this conversation becomes very important. And then there's this slide, which is a slide I've used over and over the last few years to try to make it very clear to our legislators, to our funders, to our business leaders, to our K-12 partners, that we have work to do. So you see in the blue line, the Salt Lake County population going up. This is the college-age population, slightly, but going up. You see in the orange line, the Salt Lake County USHE enrollment, any institution of higher ed in the state of Utah, going down, fairly evenly, but going down. And then look at this SLCC enrollment, the gray line. Since 2013 or so, starting to decline and continuing to decline. We thought right before COVID that we were going to start to see that kind of flatten out. And we're going to look in those details a little bit more, see that come back up, tick back up. But then we know what happened in 2020, right? So we know we have more work to do in the high school pipeline and to middle schools to help change that trajectory. And while we will always serve adult students and those that need short-term credentials, we have to do more to ensure that students and their families in the K-12 system know about SLCC, about our quality programs, and about how we have made the financial and geographical and academic access available to them. So, since the launch of our strategic plan in 2016, we've started making progress towards closing both participation gaps and opportunities for completion gaps for students of color. And we were really close to closing that participation gap in 2019. We were almost there. And then we all know what happened, right? COVID struck a blow, and as you know, a disproportionate blow to our BIPOC students and especially to our Latinx students. So you're going to see in a minute from Jeff's data that we've bounced back a little in terms of Latinx enrollment, which is phenomenal, but we still have to be very, very diligent, and today's conversation is going to help us think together about how to do that. A part of our strategic work related to closing opportunity gaps for completion, several recommendations were made. You remember Dr. Kat Kokomont led that strategy. And many of the recommendations that came from her work, we are either implementing or have implemented or are currently working on, one of which is this actual day. The recommendation came from her team and the task force that was thinking about Hispanic Serving Institution, was that this day focus on what that would look like. And so we're taking those recommendations and moving them forward. It began as a task force, and now it's continuing as a collaborative work team. So today we are going to join in on some of those conversations that the CWT has been having. We're going to learn from them and the resources that they've identified, and we're going to hear important voices that are contributing to this conversation. We're going to zoom in on the why of becoming a Hispanic serving institution, and then the how and the what we might consider to actually see success. And we hope we've included a variety of voices with different perspectives to help broaden your understanding. So in a recent conference workshop that I was in, the notion of identity-based motivation was considered in relation to college student success outcomes. And the researcher made this statement: if students are in a place where they don't see their identities acknowledged, they will retreat. Identities are constructed, we know, through context, and context can cue and support different aspects of identity. So the theory is that we much prefer, all of us prefer to be identity congruent than identity incongruent, right? That is a human experience. So then the presenter asked us, how are we setting up our learning environments to line up with the multiple identities that students are bringing with them? That beautiful identity that Chelsea just described, the conflicts and tensions that exist in that identity. How are we setting up those conversations? And how are we setting up interactions with students to make sure they see the relevancy of our curriculum, our advising, our advice in support of their identities? Those are some of the questions that we're going to be considering today as we think about what it would take to be a model for inclusive and transformative education. So this morning you're going to hear from the chair of our Board of Trustees, Maria Farrington, who will share the board's commitment to and support of our equity initiatives and how they're adjusting their focus to ensure that. You're going to hear from Jeff Aird, who will share a more detailed data related to our overarching strategic goals and especially our Latinx students. You will hear from Alonso Reyna Riverola and Richard Diaz, who are co-leading the Emerging Hispanic Serving Institution Task Force, or collaborative work team, and a special shout out to all of those members of that collaborative work team who have been working very, very hard. You're going to hear from our own students and your own colleagues who identify as Latinx and what that work means to them. And finally, you will hear from Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, the author of Becoming Hispanic Serving Institutions, who will be our keynote today, and who is leading and guiding this important conversation throughout the country. Our afternoon sessions will continue the discussions offered both in person and on Zoom from a variety of perspectives, and I have to just say how much I appreciate the work of Jesse Winnescu-Stevens, Jeff Aird, Marilee Dunn, and Alonso Reyna Riverola, who many others today and before today that have brought these conversations to life. So could we give all of those planners a great round of applause, please? So I'm going to turn some time in a moment to Chair Farrington, but let me just share a little bit about her and her background and the commitment that she has made to Salt Lake Community College. So Maria was appointed to the Salt Lake Community College Board of Trustees in 2015, and she became the chair in 2019. And for more than a quarter century, Maria's career has focused on developing policies and programs designed to address growing inequities in education and disadvantaged populations. She retired from Holy Cross Ministries as the CEO in 2018, and she's held executive positions at the United Way, the Children's Museum of Utah, and communities and schools in San Antonio, Texas. She continues to serve her community, not just at SLCC, but by working with the Girl Scouts of Utah and the University of Utah's Tanner Board for Peace and Justice. Maria earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Houston and attended the University of Utah for a Master of Public Administration. And she's the founding member of the Chicana Cultural Book Club and continues to seek opportunities to backpack, explore, and travel to the far corners of the earth. Maria was married to Bob Farrington, and together they had 2 sons. And now she takes great pride in spending time with her grandsons. We're going to hear a short video, watch a short video, and then we'll turn the time to Maria Farrington.
So my experience so far has been pretty great and positive. Straight out of high school, I joined the Summer Bridge program, which allowed me, not only me, but people in my community to get a more strong and communal start at SLCC. So through that, I learned about different resources that SLC has to offer for the Latinx community. So far, it's been really great. Some professors do make it known that your family matters, that your identity does have value. So I do see that at SLCC, definitely. A lot of faculty kind of makes assumptions about the Latinx community. Of course, not all of us are from Mexico. We're not all Mexican. We all don't speak Spanish, maybe not fluently or at all, but we're all part of the Latinx community. And I feel like they kind of just need to educate themselves a little bit, because I have had some experiences where I've been like stereotyped by faculty. Yeah, so I've been in a couple classes where if they need something translated in Spanish, for example, if they need gold translated to Spanish, they look over at me and they're like, how do you say it in Spanish? Prior to that, I never had told them I knew Spanish. They just kind of assumed that I did. Or when they are talking about minoritized or marginalized groups, they kind of just glance over at me. Of course, everyone's different. They're going to have different opinions. But I feel like most of the Latinx culture wants to talk about their culture. Like, we're proud of it. And we want to be heard and speak about it. So we want to educate people so they won't have those assumptions. Like I said, the Latinx community doesn't know how to navigate these spaces. We don't know what resources we have. We don't have a support group. And me, I joined Lucha, which is a club for Latinx United for Change and Activism. And that was my support group. They taught me how it is, or how do I say this? They taught me how the college experience is not to go through it alone. And I feel that's very important. The Latinx community needs to unite. We need to push each other to get an associate's degree, to pursue higher education. And that's how I navigated my space here. Yeah, it's also important to see role models that look like you. It's my third semester here, and never before have I seen a Latina woman as a professor. And so I got my ethnics teacher was Cindy Fierros, and she was just like such an inspiration for me. She was my role model. So it was sad because I hadn't seen it before, but also amazing because it was my first time. I guess the inclusivity at Slcc, I mean, they have community events for the Latinx community. Just the term Latinx in general just makes us feel all welcome. And walking the hallways and seeing people that are like me, that speak my language, that share common interests as me. I mean, I didn't see that when I was little. And seeing it here, it's like empowering. Myself, I am a first-generation college student. My parents didn't even go to high school. My mom barely went to middle school. So me coming to high school, to college, and pursuing higher education, I'm becoming a role model for generations after me. And that's great for me, you know? And I just want to be that sense of support system in my family. I want them to know that it's okay to pursue higher education. You don't have to go work a 9-to-5 job that you don't want to work right now. That males can go into higher education too. They don't have to go into construction or something, because that's another stereotype. And I came here and I'm like, I didn't have high hopes. I was like, my brother said it's okay. I'm just gonna get in, get out, and that's it. But I realized that he didn't get involved. And I feel like that is key for having a good educational experience, a good college experience. So I made it a goal of mine to get involved, to do community service, to get to know the people around me. I feel like they shared their own personal experience with me. They were honest, they were caring, and overall just good people.
Good morning, buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be here at the beautiful Grand Theater and on the campus of Salt Lake Community College. Like other speakers, I'm here to share some perspectives as you begin today's work and your discussion about SLCC as an emerging Hispanic serving institution. But first, I wanted just to share with you exactly what trustees do. So first, it's as President Humphrey said, you have an invitation from the governor, I think with a little bit of information from the president. and you are vetted by the Utah Senate. Anything to get through the Utah Senate, you know, if you can get through that, that's good. But simply, our job is the public governance of the college. We approve the budget, we review and approve real estate transactions, and we review actions centering around degree programs and certificate programs. In 2017, we took a big step, and we focused on assessing the extent to which SLCC fulfills its mission, the mission that President Humphrey just went through. We chose to create, to monitor, and assess mission objectives. In 2019, we issued our first ever mission fulfillment report, which confirmed that SLCC is indeed achieving its mission. We did, however, also identify areas for improvement and for further exploration. This is what they are: closing the opportunity gap, addressing declining college participation, challenges for crafting a successful transfer system. More recently, this year, we are discussing what, as trustees, we can do to advocate and to provide outreach to communities that are often marginalized and really overlooked. But perhaps the most important work that SLCC trustees have begun is to adopt the USHE Equity Lens Framework. This framework, which can be found on the USHE website, is a tool comprised of shared beliefs, common definitions, and critical questions through which organizations commit to continually evaluating any existing new strategy, policy, or initiative. This framework will guide us as we approve budgets, institutional policy, academic and CTE programs, and for all the functions of the board that we undertake. All of this work is being done with the assistance of the college's remarkable leadership and staff, and I want to say a big thank you to Jeff Aird. So, this is really important to me, not just as the chairman of the Board of Trustees, but as a Latina. I am a sixth-generation Tejana from San Antonio, Texas. The work that you will do today, the discussions that you will have, represent a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for many students to attend college. And the truth of the matter is that your work will give families, whole families, just like Belen just said, a chance for better lives. You ask how? So I decided my perspective is going to share with you my story in terms of understanding how. My grandfather, Jose Trevino Cepeda, was 44 years old when he learned to read and write. He lived in a world in South Texas where Mexican Americans did not go to school, unthinkable. His 5 daughters went to school only until the 9th grade, my mother, and then they were shipped off to secretarial school. That's what they called it, secretarial school. Again, those girls lived in a world where high school was unattainable for Mexican Americans, especially girls. But their one brother, Antonio, wanted to become an engineer, and he attended night school for 5 years. Now, by that time, all of his sisters were already working, and they were obligated, and I mean obligated, to provide money to him so he could go to school. And when he graduated and handed them each a parchment with the seal of being a civil engineer, the Cepeda family was convinced that by hook or crook, their children would attend college. Underscore, my grandfather insisted, and when that guy insisted, you listened. But because of that struggle, his 19 grandchildren earned college degrees, and with some masters and 3 PhDs. And so I'm here to tell you it's that passion that many SLCC students have and their families have to compete, to complete, and to continue their education. But often that passion is met by indifference or non-support. And too many times, it's all but impossible to attend classes while working to provide for their families. And in the end, putting food on the table many times wins out. So, on behalf of the SLCC Board of Trustees, I want to thank each and every one of you that are here today and on Zoom for being here, for giving your time, for what you do, for all the community, and for all of your students. And I'm here to tell you that as you engage in the steps to become Hispanic Serving Institution, it is good for all students, not just one group. It's important for us, but it's good for all students and will make SLCC a better institution. So today marks a turning point for SLCC and for the students that will be in your classrooms soon. I want to thank you so much.
I think that model exists in some capacity because there are some faculty who are not Latinx that model this type of behavior in an excellent way. I've met some of these faculty. They're partners in the Bridge program, and so they've taken the time to check their own bias, to go to these types of trainings and understand what it is that they do explicitly and implicitly that create situations that are harmful for Latinx students. You know, those stop-out points where a student either loses interest, no longer feels valued, no longer feels like their contributions in the classroom are up to par. And so they've identified that that happens. And so they've made those changes internally to their curriculum, to their approach, so that students have what we call psychological safety, right? So they do feel seen and heard. And so those trainings are important. I think we need to do more of them. I also think that the responsibility should not just fall on Latinx faculty and staff to lead these. It's a good opportunity for white faculty to also continue to own this and make progress with their peers. And so the opportunities are there, right? These jobs exist, and these companies, especially I think in the Salt Lake Valley, they value that diversity for the reason that they understand what these students bring to the workforce. You know, that commitment, the resilience, all of the things that they had to overcome as children to get to where they are, like that's what they want in their workforce. And so they are looking to us as SLCC to say, we know you have the students and we know you're training them well, so where's the disconnect? Like why are they not applying to our openings? And so there's also an opportunity there to make sure that our students understand on the back end what is waiting for them, right? Because some of our students arrive and they're here without a strong why, and that's maybe those are the students that are sitting in the back that aren't raising their hands, that aren't showing up, ready to go every day because they still haven't quite figured out what's in it for them. So that's a piece that we have to help them see. So, and the sooner we can do that, the better. What does the research say? So we know that cohort models work. We know when we group students together, retention is higher when they're living on campus and they are in a like-minded environment, whether that's based on GPA or major, something, right? But at the same time, we're stretching that idea by asking these students to separate from their families because it might not be that simple, right? So what is the repercussions if you have an older student who has 3 or 4 or 5 younger siblings and the expectation is mom and dad wants you to take these kids to school, to get them ready, to feed them while they work? We are setting the student up for failure in that context. I think when I look at my freshman students now that are coming in, and I'm trying to ask myself, what makes it welcoming for them? What is the experience that they need? What are the things they don't know? It's as simple as making sure that whenever they feel like they have a place to rest and relax, that they can play their music, that they can eat, the foods that they enjoy, and nobody's going to come up and ask them, like, what is that or why are you doing that? So they don't have to constantly explain their presence or their behaviors to others. And I think just creating that comfortable environment has made the difference. You're right, and because there are fewer Latinx students, it's often seen as foreign, and so if a student has to explain or justify like why they're doing something or what they're reading or what they're eating or what they're listening to, those are those microaggressions, right? And one time's not so bad, twice maybe not, but if you do it every week, I mean, you start to feel unwelcomed and it's exhausting. So shielding that or calling out that behavior. So when students see somebody in a position of power stop that, they're going to remember that just as much as they're going to remember when they see somebody ignore it or treat it like it's not a big deal. So let's break it way down. Let's get as simple as possible. Does this feel like home? You know, and that's a question to ask students. I can't answer that for my students because I know what home feels like for me. But if I have, you know, a couple hundred brand new first-time freshmen that identify as Latinx, does this feel like home for them? And so those are the things that I can change, right? I have that influence. I have that power to make those changes so that it does feel like home. Well, we got to get to know our students, right? And so that is that also not just on faculty, because there's a lot of responsibility on faculty, but us as staff members, like that's our job. And each person that is employed here at SLCC, do you really know your students? Yeah. Do you know what it would mean for them to feel like they're at home? Do you know when they feel safe and when they don't feel safe? I think that's the starting point. Because if a staff member or a faculty member cannot answer those questions, then we have work to do.
Thank you, Kino. Marion McKnight just told me this is what she looks forward to every year. And I know all of you are super excited to spend the next 20 minutes learning about college data and where we are and our goals. Thank you, I appreciate it, I like it. I'm gonna take about 20 minutes, but I actually wanna take us down memory lane a little bit to start. My own memory, not yours. In 2014, right after I joined the college, the Access and Success Priority Council, some of you will remember the old priority councils, chaired by our very own Vice President Haftalit at the time, tasked me with developing a metric to measure access for underrepresented students. As we developed what is now known as the Populations of Color Participation Ratio, I was asked to present our initial report in a college open forum. As we prepared the material for the presentation, questions began to arise as to the terminology and labels we use for different populations. Specifically, I was asked to explain why we use the term Hispanic. I vividly recall my attempted answer to this question because it wasn't very good. I tried to explain that we are using federally established data collection and reporting methodology. I attempted to acknowledge that there are other valid and perhaps even more accurate names. But my lack of knowledge around inclusive words and language was apparent. I stumbled around explaining what the words meant, mostly because I didn't know. I tried to just push the issue onto other higher authorities like the US Census Bureau. I still remember the look in some of my colleagues' eyes as they felt unseen, unheard, and misunderstood. I left feeling like I had hurt many people in the room. I also left knowing, though, that I could do better, and I would do better. And so today is a chance for us to do a little better. Words and language matter. Few things relate to a person's identity more than their name and their language. Today, we're spending many hours discussing the topic of SLCC as an emerging Hispanic Serving Institution. This gives me an opportunity to try again and recognize the complex layers of colonialism, oppression, and minoritization that weigh down that term. Now, as a researcher, I appreciate the need to have clear and unambiguous definitions. To measure something, it must be defined with clear boundaries and limits. But this means that those who are creating these definitions often transpose their own assumptions and lenses into those very definitions. Our data is awash with the ideas of colonialism. Under federal and state guidelines, we are often forced to report counts in ways that do not reflect the complexities of student identity. For example, we have been forced to combine the ethnic identity with racial identity. Hispanic and Latinx are terms reflecting one's ethnicity, where white, black, Asian, Native American, and Pacific Islander, these are terms reflecting racial identity or categorization. We have people in this room right now who identify in many, if not all of these ways. Yet on paper, we often treat them as separable. If someone identifies as Hispanic, that becomes their race. Yet there are Black, White, Asian, Indigenous, and Pacific Islander people who also identify as Hispanic. In fact, so this chart here represents our fall 2021 Latinx students by their race, right? So you can see that 48% told us that they identify as white Hispanic. 42% looked at that question and said, I have no idea what to do with this, right? They said, oh, I'm just gonna prefer not to answer this question. 5% tell us that they identify as multiracial, 2% American Indian or Alaskan Native, 1% Black or African American, 1% Asian, and 1% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders. So the rich diversity of the Hispanic or Latinx community is complex. It becomes increasingly important that we continue to challenge the colonial ways of thinking and reflect the ways of knowing inherent in the diverse cultures and ethnicities that comprise our community. So what does the term Hispanic really mean? Here, I want to point to our very own Brenda Santoyo, whose recent blog post on The Fountain, if you're not an avid reader of our blog, please pick it up. She presents the most frequent terms we hear when discussing our Hispanic population. According to Santoyo, Hispanic is a term that the US Census introduced in the 1980s to capture a demographic with similar cultural characteristics. Hispanic refers to individuals from Spain, or those who speak Spanish due to Spanish colonization. But not everyone in Mexico, Central and South America speaks Spanish. Hundreds of languages exist in this vast and diverse global area, including Portuguese, Creole, Quechua, or Nahuatl. Are these individuals Hispanic? Well, let's set that aside for a minute. Because the focus of Hispanic has been on the Spanish language and culture, the term Latino, Latina, or Latinx has often been employed as a substitute. Santonio continues, Latina, the feminine, or Latino, the masculine, are more comprehensive terms to refer to cisgender or transgender individuals who identify with the gender binary and have roots in Latin American territories colonized by the Romance-speaking languages, France, Portugal, and Spain. So let's be clear, the term Latin America is itself another colonial term used to assert control over the nations of Mexico, Central and South America. And again, the term offers language as the unifying characteristic, but it's the colonial languages or the Romance languages that are given the importance. In our SLCC reports and in the presentation today, we will often use the term Latinx as a substitute for Latino or Latina, acknowledging that this overly simplifies the complex overlays of gender, identity, and ethnicity. This more single comprehensive term in our reporting is an effort to succinctly report on all Latin American identities. An important part, all of this is to say that an important part of becoming a Hispanic serving institution is our discussion on the terms we use to appropriately and respectfully represent individuals and population identity. Now, I am not aware of any widely accepted term that fully encapsulates the ethnicity and identity of people from Mexico, Central, and South America, probably because no term could accurately reflect the unique histories of these various geographic and social regions and their rich diversities. But like the US Census and the Pew Research Center, at SLCC we will use both terms, Hispanic and Latinx, when reporting. But ultimately, when engaging with students from the Latin American diaspora, it is pivotal to let students tell us how they self-define, how we should refer to them and their experience. My task today is to update you on our college metrics. And as we aspire to becoming a Hispanic serving institution, it is appropriate to consider whether and how our metrics advance that goal. I hope to explore the context in which our goals were set, the progress we have made, and consider alternative ways of measuring our efforts as an HSI. But first, let's set the stage. The college's strategic plan is structurally very simple. I don't expect you to be able to read all of that up there, but it does present the timeline of how we developed and implemented our strategic plan over the last 7 years. You can access our strategic plan right now by opening a web browser and going to slcc.edu/plan. There you will find the college's vision, mission, and values. You will find how we operationalize that mission through strategic 5 goal areas. Each area has established metrics and targets. We attempt to affect change in those metrics through a combination of institutional strategies or initiatives and collaborative but often decentralized departmental efforts. The most recent iteration of our strategic plan had 10 strategies designed to improve performance on each metric. We didn't always have 10 strategies. The first one in 2015 had 16. A few years later, we updated the plan with 19. This past year, we listened to your feedback that we needed to focus, and we've pared back the number of strategies to 10. Each strategy is assigned a specific lead, commissioned to advance that strategy. And in some certain cases, where the task is especially complex, involves cross-divisional dynamics, or is prioritized as the highest value activity, we assign what's called a collaborative work team, or a CWT, to guide that strategy. And today you'll hear from the ones that are currently active in the breakouts, and we'd encourage you to go hear on where those collaborative work teams are in their work. Over the years, we have commissioned 17 different CWTs, some of them more than once. By my count, over 100 different people have been involved in these work, many more indirectly in supportive roles. Thank you for your contributions in advancing the strategic plan. You know, it's been truly astonishing for me to reflect back on the past 7 years and see the work we've accomplished. This came home to me particularly when I was reviewing our 2015 documents, when I was looking through where we started and what it looked like. In 2015, we held multiple college forums, gathering input on where the college should go and what we should do. Here's a chart that was presented in November 2015. Same formatting and everything. These were the options we considered for some of our completion strategies in 2015. Now, the blue bars represent the things that we ultimately decided to put in our strategic plan. Those are 3 of the initial strategies. But to your credit, I think everything on this list has been largely accomplished in some form or fashion. We've completely revised our placement process and developmental education sequences. We have implemented mandatory and intrusive case management advising, including the establishment of critical milestones and interventions. We have auto-awarded hundreds of certificates to students who rightfully earn them. We have boosted our scholarships and implemented better systems for students to access them. We have saved students over $15 million in the deployment of open educational resources. When I reflect on that work, when I went back and looked at all the 2015 stuff, I was just simply blown away with how much we've accomplished. It's really incredible work, and we have so much to be proud of. You know, I just feel like let's give ourselves a round of applause. And if you don't feel comfortable clapping for yourself, clap for your neighbor, because we're all in this together. Now, one reason I want to highlight 2015 isn't just because that's the start of our strategic plan, but it's also the year that we started measuring. It's the year that students who started in 2015, they just completed their 6 years under our completion metric. So now is the time that we should be able to measure if all this work and efforts have been working, or has it had an effect? And I'm really pleased to say they have. Right? So this year, the college has achieved its highest completion rate on record. Woo! The 2015 completion cohort, right, which comprises, the years on this can get a little confusing. So the 2015 cohort is the 2021 completion rate, right? So this is how that works. So what we're looking here is, these are the 6-year rates of different cohorts. So that 28.2% measure, that is the percentage of students who started in 2015 who earned a degree or certificate. Now, in raw points, that may not seem like a huge increase, right? That jump from 25.9 to 28.2, but it's nearly a 30% increase since 2005, or the 2011 rate, and a 12% increase since the start of our strategic planning cycle. It's 2 full points higher than the previous record of 26. It is so satisfying to see the success, and it's a credit to you and your tireless efforts to continually serve our students. As we state in our mission, this improvement demonstrates that SLCC is successfully engaging and supporting students in educational pathways. Congratulations. One more, there we go. Now, I wish everything I was going to say was that positive today. A part of me wants to just fold it up and walk away right there, right? Devoid some of the less pleasant things we see when we go deeper into these numbers. But we are here today in part to discuss what it means to be an emerging HSI. And I would suggest for us to do that, we must dig under the general averages of completion rates and see how completion is faring for our underrepresented student populations. Given that today is particularly focused on our Latinx population, let's focus there. The news on this front is a little mixed. On the one hand, the Latinx student population also recently achieved a record completion rate, but it was last year. The Latinx completion rate was at 24.3. This was a record high and represents a nearly 77% increase since 2005, and a 22% increase since the start of our strategic planning cycle. But while the average completion rate jumped this past year, the Latinx population saw a steep decline for the first time in 6 years. It fell from 24.3% down nearly a full percentage point to 23.4%. While the pandemic may be partially to blame for this sudden downturn, it only explains a very small amount. So let's take a look at the history of Latinx student completion at Slcc since 2005. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of lines up on the screen here using some data visualization to help you understand what you're looking at. So here we have a line, right? So what we're measuring is at the base of this is the years it takes to get to a degree or certificate. So this represents that 2005 cohort. So they start by year one, you can see there, it has about 1% of the students in that cohort had earned a degree or certificate. In the year two, about 4%, year three, you're climbing, you're about 7%, year four, about 10%, year five, 12, year six, around 13.5%. So is this chart making sense to folks? We're getting it? Okay. So I'm gonna start putting up later cohorts, right? So here's 2006 cohort, right? So they mirror pretty closely to what it was and then start to diverge in that year three and end up significantly higher. Year seven, higher again, 2007, right? So we're seeing some pretty big increases. 2008 cohort comes back down. 9 back up. 10 a little back down. And then we do 3 years that end right at that 20% mark. And we seem to have plateaued right there, right, with our 2013 cohort. So we saw some pretty good increases happening from 2005 to 2013. You can see most of that happens in post-year three. So it happens later in the student experience of where that differentiation starts to occur. But we're seeing increases, but we stalled out in the last 3 years from 11, 12, and 13. 2014 saw a big jump. But that jump happened in year two. And think about it, 2014, 15, that would be 2016, the year we started implementing the work we were doing for our strategic plan. So that would have been, 2014 would have been last year's completion rate. And so here's the 2015 group where we saw that decline that we just talked about. So they started faster, and then in year three diverged and didn't finish at the same rate as their previous year counterparts. And so when I say the pandemic may have affected it, that they actually, in the last year, they seem to be actually on par with previous. The divergence happened back in 2019, right? So the decline in the completion rate of our Latinx students doesn't appear to be driven from the issue of the pandemic. But you know, this type of analysis gives us an opportunity to also look into the future a little, and we can see, okay, where are completion rates for Latinx populations that are in the current work, where they're headed. So we can look ahead, right? So here's the 2016 number. So next year, they will be our 6-year completion rate, and they are trending higher than the 2014 number, right? So we don't know. They could flatten out at that point, but hopefully, if we continue our work and if they continue their work, we could see an increase come back up above and have a new record for our Latinx students. The 2017 group isn't performing quite as well. Or maybe a better way to say that, we're not supporting them perhaps quite as well. But it's mixed, right? So then we can look at where the 2018 group is. They're right at that inflection point, and we'll know a lot in the next year about which way they're gonna go. 2019 is trending higher than all previous years in their first 2 years. So some positive signs there. And 2020 is right on the 2019 line in their first year. Right, so what does this tell us, right? It tells us that we're not going to go back to the 2005 level anytime soon. So some of the changes we've made seems to have stuck. But we also know that there's going to be some challenges, and to keep it rising is going to require us to keep thinking about how we serve the Latinx population. So I want to just take a minute and look over the student of color completion writ large here, because if the Hispanic student population declined, what happened in the student of color completion rate? And it actually went up. Hang on one second. I've lost my spot. Here we go. So with that in mind, you might expect the completion rate for all students of color who had declined as well, but in fact that is not the case. This past year we saw a record high for the 6-year completion rate of students of color. It jumped another 1.5% from 22% to 23.6%. So even while our Latinx students experienced a decline, other populations had offsetting increases. This speaks again to the idea that the student experience isn't the same across all populations. So this graph shows completion rate change over the last year by race and ethnicity. Asian, multiracial, Black, or Indigenous or Native American populations saw increases in their completion rate, where our Latinx and Pacific Islander populations saw declines. But the number of students of color on the whole who completed a degree or certificate increased enough to have an overall completion rate increase among our students of color. But here's the worst news of the day. Even though the student of color completion rate increased, it did not increase at the same rate as their white student counterparts. This means that while we saw some gains in student completion across many populations, on the whole, the opportunity gap, that measurement between the completion rate of students of color and their white peers, widened. This is a little bit of a tricky metric to visualize. What we are essentially measuring is the difference in completion rates between students of color and their white peers. The graph on the screen is represented in negative numbers because it's the percentage less likely students of color are to graduate. It's measuring that gap in opportunity that students of color experience at SLCC. Students of color are encountering challenges and obstacles that significantly impact their completion rates. Due to the drop in the Latinx completion rate, we saw this measure widened. It increased from -20 to -23. Which means that students of color in the 2015 cohort were 23% less likely to graduate than their white peers. Let's add in here our Latinx population. This is the opportunity gap for our Latinx students. You see that it largely tracks the institutional average, but it's seen more volatility in the past 3 years. Last year, the Latinx completion rate was at a record high. The gap closed to less than 10%, but then fell back this last year where it was close to where it was before. But there are some small positive signs here. The trends seem to be positive. They are increasing. We are closing the opportunity gap and making SLCC more equitable. Not as fast as we might all like, and we took a small step back this past year, but overall improvement appears to be happening. Our efforts and initiatives do seem to be making a difference. And another important trend that we are seeing impacts our institutional metrics and influence our emerging Hispanic Serving Institution status is the composition of our new students. So we measure completion rates by looking at our new students coming in. And in 2005, when we first started tracking the 6-year completion rates, we had just under 7,300 new students join us that fall. This number peaked with the Great Recession in 2009 at about 7,500 new students. From 2009 to 2015, we've seen steady decreases in the number of new students coming to SLCC. Some of this was the natural flow of the economy following the Great Recession. That 7,500 number was probably never real sustainable. But when the new student numbers increased in 2016, we were hopeful that the times were shifting and new enrollment patterns would emerge. We were relatively flat for a few years before we all celebrated a significant increase in 2019. We were really feeling like our P20 and our high school pipeline work was doing its work, that the foundational student enrollment seemed to be stabilizing and the high school flow of students into SLCC was increasing. Then we hit a pandemic. The last 2 years has seen a cliff in new student enrollment. The past fall, we were at a new low for student enrollment as we dipped below 6,000 for the first time since we started tracking the metric. But not all student populations are decreasing. In fact, a number of new students of color have been steadily increasing over the same time period. Even as overall enrollment was decreasing, the number of new students of color was increasing. In only 3 years since 2005 has the students of color numbers decreased. Those are in 2007, 2015, and 2020. The most stark is 2020, when the number of new students dropped by about 16%. So let's compare 2005 to 2021. In 2005, this isn't where you think I'm going to go, but the best picture was Clint Eastwood's $1 Million Baby. The song of the year was John Mayer's Daughters. And J.J. Abrams won an Emmy for the most confusing sitcom in TV history, Lost, which I think described its viewers more than its characters. But Salt Lake Community College's new student enrollment was also made up of 80% white and 10% Hispanic. By 2021, No Man Land had won the Best Picture. Her performed the song of the year, I Can't Breathe, at the Grammys. And Netflix took home an Emmy for its series, The Crown, and SLCC's new students have also significantly changed. More than a quarter of new students are Hispanic. Less than 2/3 of new students identify as white. Over that time period, new Hispanic students increased by 126%, even as the total number of new students declined. Our student body looks significantly different. While population projections suggest the rate of change will slow over the next decade, the future of SLCC is clearly multi-ethnic. Our strength and future will come from our diversity. Now, I do have one last metric I want to highlight before we finish with a quick review of our strategic metrics. And this is our measure of equitable access. We call it our participation ratio. This ratio compares the diversity of Salt Lake County population to the diversity of our student body. You can see on the graph that we have made considerable progress measure from 2011 to 2018. Right, so the goal here, right, so 1 would mean that our students are reflective of the county we serve, the populations we serve. And since 2018, when we actually hit representation or reflection of our Latinx population, we've been flat and down. Now, we came back up a little bit this past year, but our progress has largely stalled. It seems as though the so-called easy gains in this metric are done. To continue to diversify the college and attract more Latinx and other students of color, it may require something new, something that better represents their interest and values. Well, a few years ago, it seemed inevitable that we would hit the federally established mark for what it means to be an HSI, which is an arbitrary measure, but it says 25% of your credits are delivered to Hispanic students. We thought for sure we'd hit that in the next 2 years, and that's not so certain anymore. While we're on the path, and we will probably hit it, our diversification has slowed. So I want to finish up with just a quick review of where we are on each of our goals. And we have these 3 big goal areas. We've been talking about data on all of them a little bit. We haven't done too much on transference and workforce. But I do want you to see what this looks like on a quick dashboard, right? So we have 6 metrics, our KPIs as a college, right? And we track these every year to understand how we're doing on performance. Our completion rates, our participation ratios, and our opportunity gaps. Those are things I've just talked about, right? So in those areas, we're trending up or flat. We appear to be making some progress on those. We have other metrics, our transfer degree conversion rate, our completion, our competitive wage rate, and our annualized budget-related FTE. I'm going to just run through those really quick. And I haven't been talking about the targets much. Here you will see where we are overall in completion and where that's going up. And we set a target in 2015 that would be at 40%. And I get to tell the president that it doesn't look like we're going to hit that 40% mark. But we are seeing improvement. I think there are things to be proud of. And then when we launch into our next strategic planning cycle next year, it'll be an opportunity for us to reflect on where that number should be and what the aspirational goal would look like. We already talked about the opportunity gap and the participation ratio. I will just really quickly give you an update where we are on transfer. So this measures how well students who complete. So this is a post-transfer measure. We can think about this as a quality measure of our graduates, right? So about 80% of them tell us they want to transfer and get a bachelor's degree. So it's important for us to know how many of them are actually able to do that. And it's about 41% are able to go on and get that bachelor's degree after they finish their transfer degree here. And that number has been relatively stable and isn't moving very much. We'd love to see that continue to rise. And there's some other leading indicators we're looking at here that are also relatively flat. So I know there's been a ton of work done on the transfer side. We need to keep working to figure out how to have it have its greatest impact. Some good news on this front is our workforce goal. We track the wage outcomes of our students to check and see if they're getting employment, and employment at wage levels that we feel are respectful of the education that they've had. In 2015, we set a benchmark, and we said we wanted to have our 65% of our students earning a wage that at the time we had calculated would be about $35,000 1 year after college. How I came up with that 35,000 number was a deep, long conversation, but essentially represented the median income, median wage for an entry-level occupation that requires an associate's degree. That's essentially what that was. We've seen success there. In fact, this past year, we surpassed that number. So if you're working on the workforce side of the house, helping your students get jobs, good work, you're seeing an impact. Students' wages are increasing, and we have achieved at that point for our target. The last one is our sustainability measure. So this is our measure of where we are on enrollment. And we track specifically what's called a budget-related FTE. It's a measure of how many credits we're delivering that generates revenue for the college. And you can see the trend line there. We've talked about this a little bit. You can see how it dropped down from the Great Recession and then kind of flattened out. And we keep thinking it's going to turn and come up the other way, not at the same rate, but at least start to trend upward. And then the pandemic hit again and knocked that down again. So lots of work is happening here. Lots of conversation about where we keep going with this. Okay. So before we break for a short intermission, because I know that's been a lot to take in here, so we're going to take about 10 minutes or so on that. Maybe 5 minutes or so. I would like for us to hear from one more Slcc student and one more piece by Chelsea, if she would. After Chelsea, we'll break for about a 5-minute intervention, grab a drink, there's some refreshments in the back. If you could be back here by, maybe like 11:05, we'll get started finishing up. Thank you. We'll do a quick video and then Chelsea.
But for being a Latinx student, I feel like I found resources pretty soon. Like, it's definitely, you got to search out for it, but I think my first couple weeks here on my first semester, I heard about Lucha Latinos United for Change and Activism, which is a club here, and Somos Más, which is, I wouldn't fully call it a club, it's a program, but to help students set meetings with advisors to help planning, which being a first generation student, I didn't have any of that record knowledge. I wasn't aware of where to go, what resources were offered, because I thought a lot of the things would be like high school, but right here you kind of have to go out and transfer them. But I think faculty might carry an unconscious bias with them and they might not be aware of it. Everyone kind of has these little judgments where they grew up and their experience kind of build that bias. And I think as faculty, you kind of have to critique that and evaluate and see why do I carry these beliefs with me? I think my biggest advice for faculty would be to listen, to be there, to share that willingness. I know a lot of professors will stay after class and be like, hey, if y'all need to talk, I'm here, which is amazing because usually I've noticed that there's always a group of students that will stay afterwards and they'll have something to say. And everyone has something to say eventually, but I think it's just being there, willing to show up, willing to listen. And also it's a mix because you don't want to interject all of your personal stuff right away because you might be they might not be ready to handle that. They might not be aware that you were struggling through that. But I feel easing it up and building that foundation of trust, because it's never easy to trust someone right away. It's hard because in life, you see so many bad things going on. But I think with professors, them teaching you, them being there and being an educator, being someone that you can trust, it's definitely it's hard and it's nerve-wracking to go in there and be hey, do you have a second? But if the willingness and the way you respond, the way you're yes, of course I do, like, or like, oh no, I don't, or like, what is it? It's like, it's very much tone and like perspective and how you're responding. I think like one technique, like faculty members could break down the barrier to like access Latinx students and like being like, hey, like I'm here for you, even if they don't come from a Latinx background. I think it's like doing like research and being aware of what's happening in the Latinx community. I feel like a lot of individuals like may not be aware of like all things happening in the Latinx community since like it's such a big community, and like, but I think if you were just like investigate like little things within the Latinx communities and just different perspectives, different topics that are going on, and just like try to interject those with like different Latinx individuals, they'll open up. I feel like a lot of people want to talk about themselves or like talk about like what's going on in their communities, and sometimes they might not have like that space, or sometimes they might not have people that are aware of it, so they kind of just keep that in mind and it sits there.
It's been really great listening to all these speakers today. I haven't had the privilege of attending an event like this before, especially for higher education, so it's really great. I think you guys got to know me pretty well in the first poem, so I don't think I have too much to say about this one. I guess I'll preface it just that it's about flowers, so that's fun, right? And feminism, which is also fun. So this piece is titled, "Tell Me I'm a Venus Flytrap in All the Best Ways." I told him that lotus flowers were my favorite. I don't know how I decided they were the most beautiful, but I did. Maybe it was the way they seemed graceful, sat still long enough to sprawl back on the water, make a home out of the tension, and not drown in it. Maybe it was the way they could afford to be vulnerable, stay open, showing all layers of themselves, sin miedo, without fear of what the world would do, knowing that fragility exists. I've always thought myself a Venus flytrap. I'll snap and bite, maybe not in the sense of waiting to consume whatever comes close, but not wanting to be devoured. I don't believe I was born this way. I believe it is something of an evolution from listening to too many stories about how flowers are so easily plucked by hands that do not deserve them and then die. I've grown in a world where this has become a default setting. To think that there are so many flowers to choose from, what's one more left wilting and forgotten? What a violent way some men choose to show love with their hands. 2 fingers crossed behind their backs before the words are even said, the others tearing flowers from their roots for whatever they deem necessary, then throwing out the whole bouquet when we are no longer as vivid as we were when our parents grew us up from the soil. In middle school, boys told me that I was scary, and it made me laugh, show both rows of fangs and smile at the compliment. But a part of me has always wished to be the kind of effortless beauty that the lotus flowers are, and I've never even seen them in person. And if that's not a metaphor for all that we ache for behind a screen when we are alone. But the other day, in my feed, I did see a Venus flytrap that also bloomed, also sprouted flowers, had soft white petals to show for it, for the people who deserve to know they existed, for those who stuck around long enough to see. Thank you all so much.
Sure. Bring everyone back. Okay, everyone, we are ready to get started with the rest of the program. Good morning and welcome back. Richard and I will be your hosts for the rest of the morning. My name is Alonso Reina Rivarola. My pronouns are él and him, and I am the director of the Middle School Family Engagement Program, as well as the interim chief diversity officer, and I also serve as the co-lead of the Emerging Hispanic Serving Institution collaborative work team.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that energy. My name is Richard Diaz. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am the director of the Orientation and Student Success Department. I'm also co-interim associate vice president for student success with Candida Darling, and I'm excited for that role, but I'm going to be stepping down fairly soon when they find a permanent person to take over that. Unfortunately, we did have a video from one of our students who graduated with honors from Select Community College. His name was Joan Lopez Figueroa. Because of timing, we're going to have to cut that video from our presentation, but I'm really hoping that we can post that online so all of you can go in and see that video.
Thank you, Richard. So we would like to first thank Belen, Brian, and Kino for sharing their experiences with us. And before we start our remarks, we also want to acknowledge the land that we're on today. If we can change the slides also, please, that'd be great. So, and two more actually. Perfect, thank you. So Salt Lake Community College is located on the indigenous shared territories of the Goshute, Dene, Paiute, Shoshone, and Ute people. We honor the original ancestors of this land and other tribal nations to cultivate respect and advocate with our indigenous students and communities who are still connected to this land. Acknowledging the land that we're on is the first step towards reconciliation and serves as a formal reflection of our society's attempt to erase indigenous people and the historical trauma caused by colonization.
Although Alonso and I are standing here, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge the shoulders that we're standing on to get to where we are. Becoming an emerging Hispanic serving institution did not happen overnight. The work started long before us, and we hope it continues long after we both return fully to our director positions in a few months.
We would also like to thank some individuals who helped us envision this work along the way. Maria Martinez, the former director of the Office of Diversity and Multicultural Affairs. Yes, please, a round of applause. Maria was instrumental in moving forward Strategy 10 and recommendations that gave birth to the CWT. She, alongside our former AVP for Student Success, is why we're here today. We would also like to extend a special thank you to Nadine Bone, whose administrative support is instrumental in ensuring that we can meet and carry out this important charge. Woo! Finally, we would like to thank each of the CWT committee members who are making this work possible here at SLCC. And we can also give them a round of applause.
Becoming a Hispanic serving institution is not a destination for us. It is a journey, one filled with ups and downs, tensions to resolve, including things like, am I going to speak Spanish today? What am I going to wear? Should I wear my poncho that I usually wear on Fridays? All those things are things we're going to need to resolve and discuss. But hopefully there's also things for us to celebrate and accomplishments for us to acknowledge. The idea of pursuing the federal HSI designation at Salt Lake Community College emerged from various conversations with faculty and staff where we reviewed data and the changing demographics of Salt Lake County, as you heard earlier today. As the only higher education institution located in the diverse west side of Salt Lake, SLCC is strategically positioned to provide access to higher education to students from these communities. As an immigrant from Peru, my family found ourselves living in the Cairns and West Valley area when we first moved to Utah. Both my parents attended Salt Lake Community College, first to learn English through our ESL programs, and later to complete a certificate through the School of Applied Technology. This certificate allowed them to obtain higher paying jobs to provide for my siblings and me. My older brother started at Salt Lake Community College after he graduated from high school, and then he left to join the military. My second oldest brother, upon returning from the military, decided to start his criminal justice degree at Salt Lake Community College. This institution is written into the story of my family, and I believe its impact can also be felt across multiple communities that represent the Latinx diaspora.
We believe that becoming a Hispanic serving institution is a natural next step in the evolution of our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion work here at SLCC. To us, at the heart of being an HSI is not just serving Latinx students, but fundamentally reimagining our practices with minoritized students at the center. We invite you to join us in reimagining higher ed through our commitments to community, mentoring, and relationship building. Now, a word of caution. As we approach this work, we must also be careful not to become a Hispanic mocking institution, one that promotes Latinx students in its publications, but does little to interrogate and challenge the norms that keep Latinx and other underrepresented students from graduating. To this end, we want to lead our work with a series of reflections that will help us in moving this forward in a meaningful way.
Many of you have read Ibram X. Kendi's work on how to be an anti-racist. I know all of us in the Student Affairs Division were asked to read this book and form discussion circles to critically think about how his principles can inform our work. Many others continue to expand on that learning by reading Kendi's other books, Stamped from the Beginning. In the introduction to the latter book, Kendi stated one of the tensions that he witnessed as he recounted the history of the United States. He stated, "I saw two distinct historical forces. I saw a dual and dueling history of racial progress and the simultaneous progression of racism. As we seek to gain the HSI designation, we must wrestle with the idea that this undertaking is made possible by both our desire to fight against the impact of colonialism, oppression, and racism in the lives of our students, staff, and faculty, while at the same time recognizing that racism is endemic to our institution and deeply ingrained by our norms, practices, and beliefs."
In a similar fashion, Gina Garcia, who we'll hear from later today, reminds us of the second premise we would like for everyone to reflect on today. In her book, Becoming a Hispanic Serving Institutions, Opportunities for Colleges and Universities, she writes, "We must recognize racism lives here, despite the fact that we are racially diverse. In recognizing racism, we must understand how racism manifests on our college campuses, because it often manifests in ways that are embedded within the positive things on campus. We are indeed the most diverse college in the state of Utah, and given our enrollment numbers, we are the closest to becoming an HSI out of all the USHE schools. Yet, does not exclude us from manifesting racism and perpetuating norms that, although maybe well-intentioned, can ultimately create harm for our minoritized students and communities. We know that many of us have already read Dr. Garcia's book in preparation for today, but if you haven't yet, we do have copies available to you that you can get through your supervisors or departments, or also through our library.
As we move the needle in the critical work we must do so with cultural humility, knowing that we do not know everything. And we must also reflect on how our actions makes us both implicit and explicit accomplices in the work to both dismantle and sustain racism in our institution. To this end, we leave you with these 4 questions to reflect on and wrestle or struggle with throughout this day.
First, what if we move forward with the understanding that all of us are both fighting against a culture of racial discrimination while also sustaining unconscious biases that inhibit the success of our students?
Pausing for dramatic effect and reflection. Next, what would it look like for us to move away from racial comfort and towards racial progress? In other words, while we want to serve our students of color in transformative ways, are we unable to do so because we may feel inclined to delay, stop, or redirect conversations when white colleagues begin to feel unsafe while discussing race, instead of exploring why they feel that way? And for examples, you can link it to concepts of white fragility and or white privilege.
Third, what do we currently consider race-neutral policies, practices, and beliefs that create barriers for our minoritized students at SLCC?
And last, do we center the experiences of students of color in the institution's strategic conversations? And are the right people at the table to accurately represent the experiences of minoritized students? Recently, Alonso and I have gone around campus to share our college's vision of becoming an HSI with key stakeholders. Many of you hopefully have heard our remarks and are here because of some of those things we've said. In one of those meetings, a question came up asking us if the structure of our student government needs to change, given the critical mass of minoritized students we serve. I would pose the same question to senior leadership and ask out loud if that structure is set up to accurately represent the experiences of students and employees of color. After Alonso and I step down from our interim roles, there's potential to no longer have any Latinx identified member present in that group. I would pose the same question to established groups in our college, like Faculty Senate, staff and faculty associations, among other groups.
I would also like to add that we cannot afford to just have one sole representative, as that can be a heavy burden for that person to carry. Plus, we could run the risk of tokenizing them. Instead, it should be our commitment to have a critical mass of change makers that can center the experiences of minoritized students, staff, faculty, and administrators. And we must compensate minoritized voices fairly for sharing their experiences and expertise with us and our college at large.
Reaching and serving Utah's Latinx population is a core component of Solid Community College's values and part of strategic mission, as we've learned today. That mission, which prioritizes advancing inclusivity by increasing access to education and providing a safe and supportive environment for all. More than 50% of our students are first-generation college students, and the majority of them work one or more jobs. Understanding the unique challenges and life scenarios of the students guide us in providing them with what they need to meet their academic goals. As we begin marketing our college as a Hispanic Serving Institution, we must move beyond the concept of merely enrolling Latinx students and move towards the harder, more ethical and responsible practice of serving Latinx students.
The work ahead is not easy and will continue to be an arduous task. Yet, I leave you with the words of hope and an example of what we could become. Focusing on the West Valley Center, I find a sense of community there that I not always find around campus. The work being let out of the West Valley Center is critical to the premise of what it means to serve Latinx students. In summarizing her work, Idolina Quijada, who's the coordinator of the center, shares, people in the Latinx community know they will be helped here and that they will find someone who understands them and knows their struggles. We tell them, you're not different here, you belong here. So with that, please, we would like to remind you to continue doing this work. It's really important for us to spear this effort in our college, and to also please continue to share in the resources, visit our website for more information, and to stay up to date, as well as to know how to engage with this work.
Thank you. I want you to know that Alonso and I did not rehearse the back and forth, so that was live, and that was our first time practicing that. But hopefully it was smooth. We will now hear from a faculty member, Daisy Hernandez, and then a final spoken word piece by Chelsea Guevara, followed by a video featuring Ariane Barbosa, an Slcc student.
We have the marketing that says we're here, but we don't reach out. So you have to reach out to dispel the fears. Okay. And so when you reach out, like let's say you send me to a Latinos in Action course, and I'm like, hey, I'm faculty at Salt Lake Community College. I would love to see all of you come and take our courses. Then students are like, oh my goodness, she's a Latina. It's a safe space. It's a safe place for me. But if we're just like, we do great. We have those pictures of diverse students, right? But if someone is let's say undocumented, they may not think that that's them, that they don't belong at the college, because you have to have financial aid to come here, right? But there's many other ways that we can make it work for them. Well, I see that there's, a lot of artifacts around our campus to show that we're inclusive in general. We have the LGBTQIA plus walkway, and, we have things that show students that we do value difference, right? And so one thing that I feel has been big in the School of Business is having someone like me be faculty to them, you know, and so when they see me, they're like, oh, you can actually, you know, be in a professional position and be Latinx. You're not discriminated here. They just don't want someone that looks like a particular, you know, person and so forth. So I feel like the services are there, the services are available for our students. It's just that a little more is needed to actually have those students feel comfortable to tap into those services. I think something that I want to add to, because it's not just the businesses, right? I don't want it to seem like, you know, it's coming from someone that is from the School of Business, but also tapping into those community partners, nonprofit organizations that do provide resources and services for the Latinx community. Another thing that I think it's important, in the high schools, they have this Latinos in Action course that I feel SLCC can partner up better with and, you know, help those students start thinking about college. Another thing that I think is important is that funding needs to be set aside for faculty in the Latinx area so that we can attend workshops and that we can attend conferences. And one last thing is, and I think this happens with everyone coming from a diverse background and feeling like it's their responsibility, because I feel that personal responsibility to be part of committees. So that's service, right? That's extra service. And I know, just like my other, colleagues who are also of a diverse background, we do spend many hours providing service for the college, sometimes equaling the amount of our full-time positions or even more. We work on the weekends. We're, trying to get meet up with committees after hours, because we feel like this work is important and our voice is important in these committees.
Again, I just want to thank you guys all for your attention and your presence at this event. I think with all the talk of representation and finding community is really important. In high school and middle school, I didn't realize I never read a book by a Latina author or by a person of color until I got into college, and that was given to me. And it was such an amazing thing to see myself or see stories like mine represented. And Latinas, we can do a lot of things, a lot more than I think that we're recognized for. So with that being said, this next piece I'm going to share, I guess is one. If you guys think you got to know me with the other two, you're going to know a lot about me right now, okay? This is one of the most recent pieces I wrote. This one is titled Somewhere Over the Border. Somewhere over the border, you wrap your arms around your sister for the first time. Look up to a face that you will forever be told holds your reflection in it. Won't let go until you're reminded that there's an entire bloodline extending out to you at this very moment that you've only ever met in picture or only ever seen in pictures. Somewhere over the border, there is a car radio that speaks with no censorship, like does not cut out the F word, and your mouth falls open like it does when you try to speak in a language you know, but your mouth has not learned yet. Somewhere over the border, there is art dressing the body of every brick wall that blurs past the car window, wrapping around curves in the most vibrant layers of spray paint. And there's art, and there's art, and there's poetry, and there are poets. You didn't know there was art. It gets lost in your family stories about the farm and the war. It gets lost in the politicians' wide open mouths and all the talks of pandillas y la violencia and survival. They don't talk about how smart we are. From the books that were held, or for the ones that couldn't be afforded. They don't talk about all the beautiful things we make with our hands. Somewhere over the border, there are hundreds of birds singing outside the airport, asking you not to leave. And your lips tug for a smile, open and wait for a language you know, but your mouth has not learned yet. How do you tell the birds you never wanted to go in the first place? And somewhere over the border, After unpacking the suitcases, you eat frozen tamales, and he eats pollo campero con ketchup like you do at home. And what a whiff of crema sent by your grandmother can do for your endorphins. Draw them out of hiding when they are diluted, drowning in all of the longing in your body for a home that has never been your home, because sometimes somewhere over the border feels like the most unfamiliar home in existence. Because somewhere over the borders where you have to explain that El Salvador is not in Mexico, and have to explain to people why your accent doesn't sound like a direct import, and you are waiting for your mouth to catch up to learn the language of your father that you swear begs you to remember something that you know is there but you have not found yet. And somewhere over the border, you are convinced that you know more than your body allows you to, that there are memories as fuzzy as cattails grown over centuries, ones that if you grab too hard will turn seedling fluff and fall through your fingers, ones that you know but your mouth has not learned yet. And somewhere over the border, I dream of children even more mixed than myself that I hope to someday have, and how I wonder if they will inherit this distant remembering, and how I hope it won't hurt as much, but that they'll still hold the feeling that you knew what you were thinking, you knew what you were just about to say. Take as much time as you need, because it will come back to you. It will come back. Thank you all so much.
I think faculty could support the Latinx students being understandable about their situation, because when you are a Latinx student where you have another priorities in your life, even like in my case, having education as a priority, because my parents taught me that the only way to get a better opportunities in life and better job and be successful was through education. Some of them, they don't have the same support at home. And basically their priorities sometimes are making money, so pay their bills, help take care of their siblings, help take care of the family. For example, in my case, I'm a mom already, so I have to take care of my kids. But being the oldest sister, I also have to take care of my siblings, because my mom and my dad got divorced. So my mom depends on me financially. So I have to be ready for her before think about college. So when the professors understand that sometimes the students, they don't have time in the weekend to do some assignments because they have to work hard or they have to support their families in some ways. I know, for example, some friends of mine that they're the only one in their family that they speak English, so their parents speak just Spanish, so they have to go with them for shopping, for hospital, to translate, to pay, to go to the bank. So this is a need that comes first before college. Even we're trying to be your best as a student and trying to do our best in our career, I think that is important. So when I started at Salt Lake Community College, it was a huge challenge because I just studied English for 1.5 years before I applied for college, and it was hard, to be honest. I felt intimidated, like you said. I felt awkward because I felt dumb. I think this is the word, because you know what you're doing, but you have to relearn in another language. Like even simple things, how to write, it's kind of, so I knew what they're teaching, but I could not express myself the way I think they were expecting it. So for me, it was hard, and I think the international students have that issue. So sometimes it's kind of okay for us to understand, but it's very difficult to us express in words, put in words what we're feeling, what we are having some challenge at. And the first semester I burned out, basically. I burned out because I pushed myself so hard to try to understand and be as good as everybody else.
Thank you, Chelsea, Ariane, and Daisy. Now, we would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Gina Ann Garcia. Dr. Garcia is a leading scholar of Hispanic Serving Institutions, HSIs, which are the colleges and universities that enroll at least 25% Latinx undergraduate students. She is also an associate professor in the Department of Administrative and Policy Studies at the University of Pittsburgh, specializing in higher education and student affairs. She's a scholar activist committed to disrupting the status quo of post-secondary education by bringing attention to the ways higher ed has historically been committed to whiteness and regularly reinforces white narratives and white standards. Connecting critical and organizational theory, Dr. Garcia research centers Latinx and HSIs and is guided by the principles of equity and justice. We are honored that she has agreed to spend some time with us today and share her knowledge and experience. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gina Ann Garcia.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I'm double. Let me turn this off. All righty. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. I wish I could be present with y'all, but here I am in Zoom again. So we'll do our best to go through and get y'all thinking a little bit about what it means to become a Hispanic Serving Institution. I wrote a book called Becoming HSIs. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm also going to talk about the things that the research that's been going on since the book came out. So let me go ahead and share my screen because I have a lot to say, but 30 minutes isn't really sufficient amount of time to say it. So I'll do my best. Let me share. And then in the afternoon, we'll have breakouts, and I'm going to talk more, and we're going to have more intimate conversations, and we'll talk more specifically about what this looks like in practice. So let me just go ahead and first start with the concepts and what comes out from the book. So I first like to share my journey with HSIs. I think it is important to talk about the fact that I am an alum of an HSI. People often ask, like, what drives you? What makes you so passionate about HSIs? And the reality is I'm an alum of an HSI. And so I believe in Hispanic Serving Institutions. When I wrote this book, I came at it with this idea that I would tell a narrative that was different than the narrative I had been reading, which was that I felt like HSIs were being framed in a way that was like that they were ineffective and they weren't as good as white institutions. And I argued pretty strongly in the book that that was because of the ways in which we compare HSIs to other institutions. And so I do this work with passion because it is something I truly believe in. I really believe in HSIs and want HSIs to all figure out what it means to actually serve students that are entering the institutions in ways that they were not entering before or historically. So let me talk a little bit about HSI, the construct, and then talk about why it's so hard to do this work. So HSIs basically are federally designated institutions and enroll 25% Hispanic students, 50% low income, and that makes you an quote unquote eligible HSI. Eligible meaning you're eligible for federal funding that comes from the federal government through competitive grant processes. If you don't apply for the designation and or you don't apply for grants, you are technically an HSI, I guess, by enrollment, but you should go through the process of actually getting the designation. And so there are 569 HSIs that are now a part of that designation. Whether or not they have applied for the designation is a different story. This is just by IPED's data that at least 569 institutions now enroll 25% Hispanic students. And there are 362 that are emerging, meaning they're coming on and will be HSIs soon enough. So one of the things that I talk about of why it's so hard to figure out what it means to serve students is because there's so much diversity within the HSIs. So there's 569, but they look very different. And so that makes it hard to figure out what it means to be an HSI when all HSIs are so different at their core that it's hard to just look at what other HSIs are doing and figure, well, what are they doing? Let me do what they're doing, because it's different depending on what type of institution you're at. right? So if you're at a community college, that looks very different than if you're at a four-year institution, obviously. If you're rural, it's different than if you're urban. If you're large, it's different than if you're small. So it's different. And so it's hard to just find like a model HSI because there's unique intricacies of being the different types of institutions. So I often invite HSIs to think, what makes us an HSI? Like, what makes us unique? What are we going to do differently? And you can learn with other institutions and model what other institutions are doing. But what do we do that makes us an effective HSI? And fill in that blank. What does it mean to be an effective community college HSI, or a two-year institution, or a four-year HSI, or regional HSI? What does that mean? And do that sort of work. And so that's usually the first sort of like entryway that I invite HSIs to think through. Like, people who are trying to grapple with this is like, think first, who are you at your core? Now, at your core, you are, regardless, no matter which HSI you are, inherently a white institution, and historically a white institution, because HSIs weren't always serving a large percentage of Hispanic students. So historically, the mission wasn't there. There's no actual structural way in which HSIs have historically served Latino students or Latinx students. And so it's a process, which is why the name Becoming HSIs of the book is so important, because I think of it as a process. Like, you enter the process, you have to think, how do I get to that moment where we actually are serving our students? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Some of the other challenges, I think, of becoming an HSI is that inherently the practices that we embody in colleges and universities are attached to whiteness, or attached to a system of white supremacy, which people don't always like that term. They think it starts to create weird feelings for people to say white supremacy. Now, when I say it, I think about it as like a system, structurally a system that's in place that none of us created, but we're all still continuing to uphold. Whether you're a white person or a person of color, we all uphold those same practices because it's all we know. It's what we breathe, it's what we know, and it's historical. And so it's not a bad thing to say that the systems are inherently white and continually reinforcing whiteness. What I encourage you to then do is say, yes, that's true. Now, how are we going to disrupt it? Right. And that's everybody. It's all folks within the institution to say, well, yeah, it's historically here. And the research is pretty strong. I have one citation here on the side, on the screen, but the research is pretty strong in the ways in which whiteness shows up in colleges and universities. But we talk about it in the curriculum. We talk about it in the ways in which curriculum is delivered through the pedagogy, the ways in which faculty deliver the content, the practices. Even when we think about engagement and involvement, those constructs were created in the 1960s, really. If we go back historically to when some of those concepts were created, a lot of it coming out of places like the Higher Education Research Institute, and those practices were being established with white students and normalized with white students. And so that's one of the ways in which whiteness gets upheld, is that, well, whatever is the standard, if it was created and established and validated with white students or with white people, then we have to acknowledge that it might look different for people of color, and likely it does. And so when we continue to uphold those white practices, it silences our students of color. It challenges our students of color to think about, well, how do I fit within this larger white practices? Because they're clearly engaged or embedded within our institution, and they're also embedded within the US. And so when I talk about white supremacy as a system, I also talk about settler colonialism, or the coloniality of power is the word. If you really dig into like decolonial research, it's the coloniality of power, which is the system that was created when the country, the United States, was established and colonized over a long process. Now, settler colonialism means that we were established, we were colonized, we're now a fully industrial in place, United States country, but the folks who settled never left. And so that's what the settler colonialism is, right? Nobody came in, took all the resources and left and went back home, but actually settled in the place in which was conquered, right, which is the United States. And so these practices, when you read decolonizing research or decolonial body of research, and particularly around education, we talk about all the ways in which we continue to see it show up. And a lot of it has to do with just inequitable access, segregated schooling. Schools are actually more segregated now than they were in the 1950s, which is wild. But like all the ways in which schools are now operated and the school choice movement have created much more segregated schooling systems. And those are attached to larger systems of oppression. Students are discriminated against based on policies that are based on things that have nothing to do with whether or not they're being educated. It might be based on subjective things like hygiene or clothing or hair. We hear about Black students who are punished for their hair, for having natural hair. Those things are what happen to students, and they stay with them within the educational system as they continue to go through the educational system and through their pathways into higher ed. And so our students stay on the margins. They don't get to see themselves in the curriculum. They don't get to see themselves represented in the teachers or the administration. And this creates a deficit view that we see of students, that we think, rather than saying things like language is an asset, we say, well, they don't speak English as well because they speak multiple languages, and their English isn't as good, versus saying, if a student speaks multiple languages, that's actually a benefit, right? That's an amazing asset to have, to be able to speak multiple languages. How do we embrace that and embody it and bring it into the institution, rather than saying, well, they're not passing, XYZ class because of a language barrier, right? So flipping that deficit upside down. So the profile of students at HSIs, as I talk about how do you actually think about the assets that students bring in, it's important to note that HSIs enroll more than just Latino students. And so it's more complex than just thinking, how do we serve Hispanic students, when we also are enrolling a large percentage of Black students, Asian American students, other people of color. And the reality is most HSIs are leaning towards being predominantly people of color and not predominantly white. It takes a while, and you will trek your way through there, but that's the reality of HSIs, that the red on the screen is Latino enrolled, depending on what kind of institution it is. And the blue all the way on the right, the light blue, I guess, is white students. And this is averages, so it's not every HSI, but this is the reality that HSIs are dealing with, is like, how do we serve students of color, not just Hispanic students, but all of our students who are at the intersections and that have been affected by larger systems such as white supremacy. Our students are also low income, pretty high percentage, usually 50% or more. These data come from the National Academy of Sciences, and they actually show that there are higher percentages of low income students in two-year private, which there aren't that many two-year private institutions, but there are larger percentages in there versus like your four-year, both public and privates. But regardless, low income is a pretty salient identity for a lot of our students. So how do we serve low income students? How do we serve first generation students? How do we serve Hispanic students? How do we serve students at the intersections of these other identities that you see on the screen here that we don't even adequately account for? If we don't even have good data to say that these students are at our HSI. So we don't even know the percentage of our students with solid confidence that are at our HSIs that also have these intersectional identities. And so the book, when I wrote the book, I came at it with this perspective of like creating counter stories. Like, how do we create a counter narrative about HSIs so that HSIs can start to see themselves in the research in a positive light? The same way that we call on educators within HSIs to think about putting students into the institution and elevating them in a way that puts them in a positive light. How do we do that for institutions as well, right? How do we show that HSIs are doing good work? Because they are. And so I went in with that idea of like, Like, I want to find good, right? What is good going on in HSIs, and how do I share that as a scholar, as a researcher, and also as an alum of an HSI who believes in HSIs? So when I collected the data for the book, I actually sampled institutions that were part of this typology that I had proposed. If you come to my sessions, the breakout sessions, as a plug for the session, we're going to spend all of our time talking about where you're at in this typology. So the typology is going to come back up because I think it's a good place to think about where are you now as an HSI and where are you going? Because if you don't know where you're at, it's hard to know where are we going to. And that's the reality of HSI work with these complex ways in which we have to become an HSI, is that we have to work towards it. And so the typology gives people a way to think, where are we now and where are we going as an HSI? Or are we happy with where we're at? And if we are, then let's just do it really well. And so the typology is based on 2 dimensions, and these 2 dimensions were coming up for me in research and also in the literature that I was reading, but also in the own data I was collecting. Was that basically I was seeing over and over again that student outcomes were the best indicator of whether or not HSIs were serving students. And people would tell me this. They would say, well, if we graduate students equitably, then we're a good HSI. Right? We should be graduating Latino students at the same rate as we're graduating white students. I say, absolutely, I 100% agree with that. And so the outcomes was a pretty salient way in which people were making sense of the HSI identity and the research. Now, the other thing that was coming up was structurally, what do we do? And so this was the way in which people started to identify unique ways in which they're being an HSI. And so folks talked about in this particular data set that I was, theorizing the typology about particular programs that were for Latino students, particular ways in which Latino students were being served maybe by a TRIO program or an EOP program or Chicano studies or ethnic studies or things like that, that they were like, well, these spaces, we're serving Latino students even better, right? We do a really good job in these spaces. And so I started thinking about, well, structurally, what do you have to do to serve your students? And how do we make that an organizational approach? Because we shouldn't expect students to only feel served in one place and not the other. That's a way in which we would say, well, over there, it's a Hispanic serving XYZ, fill in the blank, discipline or department or program maybe, but over here, it's not, it's still predominantly white. And that's hard. It's hard for students to have to travel through an organization where that's the case, where it's like they're constantly having to have different climates or different experiences. So how do we expand those things we do well to the entire structures? And so what I found was 3 of the 4 types with the data I was collecting. I also found that it was really complicated, that it wasn't that straightforward. And so one institution, their pseudonym, ACU, Amarillo College? No, what was the C for? I don't remember what the C was for, something university. They actually fit very strongly in that Latinx enhancing box. And so I used their case to expand on what is Latinx enhancing. And they talked a lot about their strengths in having historical programs that serve Latinos, satellite campuses for Latino students, cultural centers, TRIO programs, curriculum that was social justice focused. They really embraced their HSI identity. And so these were strengths. These were things that really made them enhancing, right? That they were enhancing Latino students' ways of knowing. They also told me a lot of challenges, that this was not easy, that they were struggling, there were still microaggressions, there was still racism. And so it wasn't perfect, but I still put them in this enhancing box. And so I talked about the curriculum, I talked about the programs, in the ways in which I would say that I would conceptualize that box a little bit more, like what you do in the curriculum, what you do in your programs, it absolutely matters. They also talked about the faculty and staff needing to be more people of color, which is strongly coming out in HSI research. And so I put that in there as well. But then I also but also white people got to do this. I stay pretty committed to white people have to do this work too. So we need more educators of color, absolutely, but we need white educators and white administrators and white decision makers to also be committed to this construct. So the second institution was actually a really unique institution. They're they're mostly a 2-year institution. They offered 4 bachelor's degrees, so they fit into the framing of the study. But they're a bilingual institution. They were founded as a bilingual institution, and particularly to do bilingual work with like helping students who were learning English learners, and adults who were English learners who wanted to go to college and wanted to get a degree, but needed to work on their English ability to do it in a college classroom that was in English. And so they embraced this transitional bilingual program. And so all of their classes, they're able to, what I didn't call in the book at the time translanguage, but I have come to use that term more recently, of like the ability to translanguage in the classroom. That if students are using multiple languages at the same time, that's actually a skill. That to allow students to draw on their repertoire of language is okay, and that we need to be okay with that. And so I really learned that from this institution, and I called it a third space, drawing on these different ideas of like where you actually come to embrace student knowledge and student ways of knowing and student language. And you also still continue to do what you do as an institution, which is the population measures. And then you bring it together in a way that creates something different, that third space where we do what we do as colleges and universities, but we bring in student knowledge and student ways of being as well, and create this different environment for students. And so they were really fascinating, institution to work with. The third one, I enjoyed my time working with them, but at the same time, I struggled a lot with them because on paper, they were really fulfilling legitimized outcomes, what I call legitimized outcomes in the book, which are those that at a more broad-filled level of higher ed, we accept. So like all these organizations on the page, like the Department of Ed and NSF and accreditation boards and Excellency in Education, HAKU, they all say, yes, if you graduate students equitably and in a reasonable amount of time, and it's affordable, and they get out with low student debt, and you provide financial aid and all these things in the yellow box, you're a good institution. And I said, yes, I agree. You're doing great work. They're doing great work. And they were graduating students actually in less than 4 years, which is pretty powerful. And they did it with like these various mechanisms. And I talk about that in the book. Their intrusive advising, their financial aid and scholarships, their career development, experiential learning. And they graduated students in 4 years, but they did it in a race neutral way. They did it in a way that they didn't acknowledge students' identities. And I had to take a full stop and think, am I suggesting something about HSIs that like, if they aren't centering students' ways of knowing, like the first 2 institutions, that they're not an HSI? Because they were doing pretty good job of graduating Latino students who went out and got jobs, and that they fulfilled their career objectives, which is a good thing. But the students, as we talked to the students in the sample, they never got to see themselves in the curriculum, and so that was hard on them. And they didn't really even know it until we asked them. Like when we started asking, like, have you ever had a Latino professor? Tell us about your, ethnic studies. Is there ethnic studies here? They were like, no, but my friends go to school down the street, and like we go to their campus and we go to their multicultural center, and that's cool, right? And so it started bringing up for them that like they hadn't even realized what they were missing because it just wasn't present. And so there's a lot to unpack there and think, what is an HSI? And so I think that's where the typologies really helps institutions to say, this is the kind of HSI we want to be, that we're going to be this kind of HSI. And that's okay, that all 4 types are good institutions. That final institution, the RPU, it's not a bad institution. I would just challenge an institution to think, how could you embrace your students' identities a little bit more? I'm running out of time, but I want to just briefly introduce the multidimensional conceptual framework of understanding servingness. big name, I know. This was a framework that came out after the book. It's got the same year, 2019, but it came out after. And this is a much more multidimensional way of thinking about serving your students. I don't have a lot of time to stay on these, but I do talk about in this model, and my colleagues that I wrote it with, we also talk about structures. So that bottom part of the typology, that structural ways in which you're embracing Latino students, we talk about that as well. And so the structures for us are so important. And that's what I will leave y'all with, is thinking, where do you sit in the institution? Do you have control over curriculum? Do you run a special program? Do you run a multicultural center? Are you in admissions and records? Are you in financial aid, advising? Where do you sit in the institution? And how do you become an HSI where you're at? Because structurally, that's where we're arguing that every single structure within the HSI has got to start doing this work. The policies as well, if they're not embodying, serving this, embodying what's going on, then they're not, are we fully an HSI? Right? Like, is it in our policies? Is it in our practices? Is it in our engagement efforts? Are we engaging with the Latino community? Are we thinking about ways in which there could be mutually beneficial learning with and for our communities where our students are coming from? That to me is that space of like fully liberatory HSI, called liberatory HSI in my new book, that we get to that point where it is mutually beneficial for everybody that's participating in the institution. So I'm going to leave you with that. There's some outcomes that I'll talk about in the breakout sessions, because I know I'm running out of time. I don't want to go over, but structurally, I want you to think, where do I sit and how can I make a difference, and how can I change so that it's not just on the backs of somebody else in the institution, but it's actually my work. It becomes all of our work as HSIs. So I'll stop there. And I don't think we're going to do question and answer, but I will, like I said, in the breakout session, we'll have more time to talk, and we'll talk more about the typology, and I'll share a little bit more about those indicators of serving, which we call in the servingness framework, the indicators of serving. So thank you.
Dr. Garcia, one round of applause, please. Dr. Garcia, thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to learning more at your afternoon breakout sessions. Thank you all for attending. This concludes our plenary session. We will now break for an hour for lunch. Breakout sessions will begin at 1 p.m.